All right, welcome YouTubers. Often get a discussion about why the USA or any country in general is not totally solar power dependent for its energy and getting off all other forms like nuclear and oil and coal and natural gas. Well, I'm gonna say not a lot of people use oil, but whatever, right? Why would what would it why not, right? Why not make USA all solar? So let's talk about that discussion. There's a lot of ways, a lot of variables, and a lot of misinformation because all energy everywhere is subsidized. So it's hard to always get the true cost out there. Solar is one of those heavily subsidized industries, but not that oil and gas and other stuff like that isn't subsidized. I'm not going to say that at all. Everybody's subsidized. Um, so it's tough to get apples to apples costs, and it changes at a whim. But my first example up here is El Romero, and that is in the Atacama, I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly, desert in Chile. It's relevant because it started in 2015 and they're wrapping up the build sort of 2017 here. So it's a big, power producer, gets a lot of accolades, largest one in Latin America. Um, so it's powering, some of Chile. And so just so you can compare some relative numbers to what we have nowadays, it was projected to cost $343 million. Provides, 240-ish, 246 peak megawatts. But it's really rated at 196 megawatts, so I tend to use the 196 a little bit more than the peak. As far as normal output, if you understand power, that'll come around to you that whatever it's rated at is a little bit better than peak. More realistic, right? 777,000 solar modules, 280 hectares. That doesn't mean a lot to us in the U.S., but it's almost 1.1. It's 1.08 square miles, so a square mile basically. And it will power allegedly 240,000 Chilean homes. So Chilean homes are not American homes. Chileans on average, the best I could tell looking at some data, was 3,700 kilowatt hours per year is what a typical per capita user in Chile is. America is up over 12,000, so 3 times that amount. So it would be one third of those would be 80,000 American homes would be powered by El Romero. But anyways, if I take that 343 and put it into 196, it comes out to 1.75 million per megawatt, or $1.75 per watt installed. That's a number that's gone up and down in its life, and as I look at the next example, we'll talk a little bit about that. But anyways, that's the cost per megawatt, and that's how you get out to $343 million for that 1 square mile, 770,000 solar module field. And of course, that's a dry place and a hot place and a lot of sunlight, so it's a good optimal place to put a solar field, and people don't live there, right? So good stuff. Compare that to a USA, and these are all over the board. Solar used to be up in the $7 range to install. Now a lot of people accept $3.50 per watt or $3 per watt. Industrially, that might come down to $2 per watt. But again, you have a lot of rebates, both commercial and residential. So I'm kind of looking at a residential install here, and maybe that's not apples and oranges. It's not going to matter because I'm going to use the previous one we just had, the Chile example. But anyways, a 5 kilowatt install, which is what 1/200th of a megawatt or 5 thousandths, right? Install is roughly, after rebates, 10 grand, 16 grand. You'll see this kind of all over. I think that's probably a low number, but it can be possible for that. So it's half of whatever the full cost, right? Is some people's thing. I got a little numbers a little later, which will give you maybe an Arizona example, which is an optimal, but that's kind of a good and bad number, somewhere in that arena, right? Because we're not just talking about solar panels. And the cost of solar panels have come down dramatically a while back, but you still have stuff. Now it's almost at the point where the cost of the panels have got so low that that's not really the driving factor in the install. You've got other hardware, labor, cost of acquisition for customers, and inverters don't last as long as the solar panels do. So they got to be replaced over time, and the battery and stuff like that. So there's a lot of components that are in a solar system, and the solar panels themselves are no longer. They've come down probably as far as they're going to come down, and they're not. You're not going to squeeze much more cost out of these going in the future unless there's some dramatic, because you got all these other components that go with it. But definitely the size of the panel. So yeah, 5 kilowatts worth of panels might be really good in Arizona, but terrible in Vermont, right? And it all depends on the size of your house and where you live. But let's just say this is an example, right? And so I'm doing an after-tax rebate of $2 per watt, which is probably attainable, maybe. And but either way, it's more than El Romero, so it's really $2 million per megawatt if you do that number. So I'm just going to stick with El Romero. That's a little bit lower, and maybe, who knows, maybe it was $1.50 a watt. Could be some industrial number. Not going to matter, because we need to look at USA's power use in PV panels. So the USA is, of course, I expressed a high user, 12,000 kilowatts per capita annual. We use over 4 terawatts a year. And if you round that down to a per day, it's a little over 11 million megawatts per day that the USA kind of uses. So that's a lot of power. And if you're using the El Romero example cost, then simple multiplication here is 11 million megawatts times $1.75 million per megawatt ends up being 19,250 and a bunch of zeros. In other words, 19.25 trillion. That's what it would cost to install power or PV panels in the systems in the USA. There's probably other factors that would factor in there, and I don't know how. You got to assume that your panels don't get damaged and all the other stuff. As we're talking about a lot of panels here. We're talking about a lot of power, a lot of panels, and 19.25 trillion, by the way, is more than our debt, right? In the U.S. So we need to go borrow 19.5, come up with 19.25 trillion. Just not doable in 1 year. For sure, or at one setting to just become PV reliant. Matter of fact, with the income we have and the excess that we could put on our PV panels, you might be talking 40, 50 years. And that's probably not even doable. What are our taxes, like $3 trillion a year or something? And you got to spend something, and you can't just spend it all on power. That would be 7 years, just straight all our taxes going to PV. Just not going to happen, right? So it's a lot. That's kind of difficult to pay for, is what I'm saying. You couldn't borrow that money. That's going to put you further in the hole. And ultimately, it's a little over 60,000 square miles of panels. So basically the size of Georgia. There's quite a few states you could insert there, but pretty big size. All but the highest sizes of states. Quite a few states fit under that 60,000, is what I'm saying. So it's square miles of panels. I mean, that's a lot of panels, right? So you're dealing with that power and getting it distributed and stuff like that. Very exciting stuff, but yeah, $19.25 trillion. What is very interesting is that we know that solar is not as cheap as, it's on a per unit basis. Now, I'm not quite sure. I grabbed this yellow sort of section down the right from a website, and then I've got it further down. It goes into some detail on an Arizona example, so I'm not quite sure. But obviously they've come up with some, and a lot of people accept this 12.5, which is the PV solar lifetime costs. And of course, 12.5 is right about what it costs in America for retail, consumer, household energy. I know business, you get a cheaper discount, and wholesale powers in the 4 to 6 range. That one giant conglomerate would sell to another in terms of power. So they must be able to produce it for less than that, unless there's some other hidden incentives that are out there. So I'm not sure I believe all these numbers as they go down, but you can see nuclear is a little cheaper. conventional coal without CCS is cheaper. Gas turbines, so natural gas is cheaper. Land-based wind, yeah, okay, it's cheaper. Geothermal is really, really cheap. But some of the others, get up there. So coal, Peaker is running a jet engine, right? 747 type engine. I think they use a bunch of those in California or wherever. But we all know that, as people try to go greener, there's a couple. So Chile itself is 125 pesos, Chilean pesos. And if you convert that to the U.S. dollar, that's about 20 to 25 cents that they pay on retail for a kilowatt hour versus the 12 cents in America. So, it's a little more expensive in Chile. Germany is, of course, not a whole lot of solar, but a whole lot of stuff that is eco-friendly by decree. But they are up at 31 cents. So they're a very expensive country with all those regulations and all those green stuff. So the more green you get, the more your costs go up. So the more your bill would typically go up. In general, although I can dispute that with the next slide, on an individual basis, it's hard to dispute the countries that typically have that type of stuff. Matter of fact, USA is one of the lowest, and we've got a pretty good mixture between the three of natural gas, coal, and I forget what the nuclear. Those are our big three. Hydro and wind farms and solar are not terribly. They're less than 10%, all three combined for sure. So yeah, we're lots of low priced energy, and your energy is only going to go up as you go to these alternate methods. So I thought this was pretty interesting example, and might skew some of the numbers in a certain way, because again, one side they're telling me here's the average cost, but then they tell me, hey, this is a 5 kilowatt system in Arizona, $3 per watt installed in Q2 2016. So that's $15,000 before incentives. You get a little tax decreases that brings it down to $9,500 out of pocket. They say you're going to replace an inverter, which I don't know. They think it's going to be cheaper in the future. I don't see inverters going down. They're pretty heavy, but it's $2,500 or $1,400 depending. So the total system they put is $11,000. It's probably more like $12,000. But if you take no incentives, it's like $16,000, right, or something like that, or whatever. And so they broke down. There's a lot of fine print down there, and basically they're going to say, hey, the first year you get 9,200 kilowatts out of that system, but there's going to be little losses every year. So over 25 years, they're going to average 8,050 kilowatts yearly average. So I said, okay, 8,000 kilowatts a year for 25 years. That's basically 21.9, 22 kilowatts per day. That seems doable, right, with a 5 kilowatt system. With that's a little over 4 hours, which is that good old rule of 5 hours. 200,000 kilowatts over that 25 years. And so you're going to spend, in their example, $11,000 for those 200,000 kilowatt hours, assuming you can use them all. 5.5 cents per kilowatt hour, or if you're at the 16.5, it's 8.3 cents per kilowatt hour on your house there. So those are much lower numbers, but again, if you're going to be selling that if you try to sell it to the grid, you're only getting a wholesale. Not everybody can sell it to the grid. That's one of the problems with power in general, is that even if you buy all this stuff, it might just go to waste, or you might just you sell it for 4 cents per kilowatt hour back to the grid, et cetera, whatever the wholesale price is. So, of course, any of these examples would have to be marked up by a conglomerate, unless we all went to our own house, right, which would be a little tough. But, you're going to have to risk here that your batteries and your inverters don't go bad early, that your panels don't get tore off, right, or broken or vandalized in some regards. So I don't know if that's the true cost, including insurance, and then if you finance the darn stuff, you're going to be paying some of that back, right? So again, they came up with $1,000 a year savings for those 25 years. So it's a 11-year payback period. So you got to be good for 11 years, but certainly I guess it's doable. That's the math that I see in this residential cost example. Commercial cost might be somewhat different, and the incentives might be somewhat different. And building a massive plant of the size of Georgia, Of course, you'd spread that out, I guess, in parts of Nevada or New Mexico or Arizona or wherever. But getting back to the original concept, which is we need $20 trillion set aside, and we'll be able to get those panels. Doesn't seem real doable in now or the near future. So that's my spiel on PVing America. Go for it.